This short film will explain in detail the procedure necessary to overhaul the CV carburetors fitted to the 3-cylinder Suzuki GT750. We're going to remove the carbs by firstly removing the fuel hose and the vacuum hose situated underneath the tank. Next, remove the tank support strap and slide the tank off. Be sure to put the tank in a safe place and cover it. Remove the right-hand side panel. No need to remove the left one. Remove the two 10mm bolts holding the airbox. Next, loosen the 3 clamps closest to the rear of the carbs. If the rubbers are soft, the airbox should slide out easily. Unscrew the clutch cable guide clip and the oil pump rod. Next, loosen the 3 clamps closest to the carb bodies. Rest the carbs on a soft surface to avoid damaging the frame. Next, remove the 10mm nuts holding the throttle cables on top of the carbs. Next, testing the crank seals. Using the electric start, hold the palm of your hand over each of the intakes. Now, as you can see, you should get a healthy suction, which should be similar on all 3 cylinders. This is a good indication that the crank seals are okay. Now, look under the oil pump cover and you'll see a crankcase breather. If the bike is rideable, ride it briskly for about 20 miles, then check to see if any oil has come out of this breather. The best way to get the oil level correct on a newly built engine is to put in 2.5 litres or 2.2 litres after an oil change. When changing the oil, warm the engine first. If oil flows out onto the breather, you can reduce the oil by 0.2 of a litre. Now, this isn't recommended as a permanent cure. Stripping the carbs. Here are some of the recommended tools required to do the job. No special tools are required. It is, however, important that you use flat-sided screwdrivers. Not this type. First, remove the aluminium carb tops, which are the same on all 3 carburetors. Remove the spring and then the diaphragm assembly. Push out the needle plate. Now make sure that the diaphragms go back into the same bodies they were removed from. Pull off the fuel and vacuum hoses and remove the support bar. This appears to have had Loctite used on it. An impact screwdriver used as an ordinary screwdriver is very effective for this task. Unscrew the choke catch and choke lever. Next, unscrew the 3 screws holding the choke levers and pull out the choke bar. The individual carbs can now be pulled apart. Please note that the carb bodies are not interchangeable and have slightly different castings. Next, remove the butterfly valve. If required, give the screwdriver just a light tap to ensure it seats correctly into the screw. This can then be pulled out, either by hand or, if it's stiff, pull with pliers using a rag to stop any damage being caused. Remove the return spring assembly. And you should now be able to pull the butterfly shaft out. Also, remove the butterfly shaft seal. You now need to remove the choke assembly. Remove the top screw first. You can then use a 12mm spanner to remove the piston. Next to be removed is the pilot screw. Check that this is in good condition. Don't forget to keep the spring safe. Now remove the drain plug and washer and the 4 screws holding the float chamber. We can see that this carb has had fuel lying in the chamber for some time. Now this is fairly typical and it can be cleaned with a bit of effort. This process will be shown later on. Next, remove the float pin. The float needle valve assembly, then the gasket. If some of it gets stuck, just remove as much of it as you can at this point. Now remove the needle jet. If you have problems removing it, give it a gentle tap with the correct size crosshead screwdriver. When removed, you may find that the rubber O-ring has perished, and we would recommend that this is always replaced. Next, remove the main jet. Be careful to use the correct type of screwdriver. Now remove the pilot jet. This can often be the culprit of poor idle and slow running. Cleaning. Here we're using gunk degreaser, which you can soak parts in overnight and also agitate with a toothbrush or paintbrush. Much better though is to ultrasonically clean. This is also good for cleaning the jets if you're not fitting new ones. Now we'll show you how to remove rust and restore some typical motorcycle parts. First of all, place the items into a suitable sized tub so that you're not wasting any degreaser. Degrease all items in gunk or a similar fluid. Then rinse in fresh water. You're now ready to de-rust. Place the items into a tub and add de-rusting fluid. Leave the items to soak in the solution for approximately 24 hours. Now, as you can see, all of the rust has been dissolved into the solution. Rinse the items. Here you can see that this has been incredibly effective. For even better results, you may want to consider having the items re-zinced, and this is quite inexpensive. Faults. Here we're checking the main air jet and pilot air to see if they're blocked. Now this is the most common problem on this type of carburettor. This is a typical cause of the dreaded surging. Compressed air, carb cleaner or a guitar string will normally clear these jets. These jets are pressed in at the factory and are not removable. The main air jet is only 0.5mm and the pilot jet 1mm. This jet is reduced to 0.8mm, richening the slow-running mixture if you fit anti-surging jets. Next, I'll show you how to test for a leaking float. Now this is a common problem. Fill a saucepan with boiling water and pop the float in. Now the bubbles show you that this one is leaking. Although it's best to replace a leaking float, you can repair it as a temporary measure. For the repair, you'll need to clean the surface, then solder over the area using the minimum of solder. Now some skill is required to do this well. Now check the pilot pipe. This here is the bottom view. Here's the pilot outlet. Before carrying out this test, you must put the pilot screw in the carb body and check its condition. Now in this case, the one at the top would need replacing. Screw fully in, then turn out 3/4 of a turn. Sometimes one turnout may produce less surging. Now spray carb cleaner into the pilot inlet and make sure there's a good flow. Next, check the fuel inlet and if it's blocked, use compressed air to clear. Now we're checking the starter jet. Also, check the pressed-in starter jet in the float bowl. This is quite often blocked. Another problem, although it's quite rare, is a loose butterfly shaft. Check them before fitting. The carb tops can also be a problem. They can become worn where the choke cable passes, and this can cause an air leak. Jet removal. It's quite common for jets to become stuck, especially if the wrong type of screwdriver is being used. For this one, you'll need a small drill, smaller than the jet itself, and an easy out, which is available from most tool shops. Simply twist out. Anti-surging jets. It's pointless fitting anti-surging jets if the carbs haven't been fully serviced and are in good working order. In fact, you may find that they're not necessary. Here, we're using a piece of solder to find the distance of the pressed-in jet from the carb body. Using this measurement, place a piece of tape around the tap. Screw in the jet. Another problem can be damaged threads, especially on the float bowl. This is easily cured with the purchase of a 4mm helicoil kit. Simply drill the hole out using the drill that's normally supplied with the kit. Using the tap, which will have been supplied, make a new thread. Screw in the helicoil. Push out the tab. You now have a thread that is stronger than the original. Softening carb rubbers. Submerge the carb rubbers in acetone for around 2 hours. Now don't leave them in for too long because this can cause cracking. After this process, the rubbers will remain soft for about 4 months. Assembly. First to be assembled is the choke. Make sure that the choke plunger is able to move up and down freely. Tighten it using a 12mm spanner. Having done that, just lift the plunger and release. It should snap back down onto its seat. Replace the gasket, making sure it doesn't fold over. Next to be fitted is the butterfly shaft. Start with the left carb. Place some grease on the 2 ends of the shaft. Put the shaft seal in this way round, not this way. The shaft should slide in easily. Slide the butterfly into the slot, making sure the markings are in the place shown here. Use Loctite on the screws. Make sure the butterfly forms a good seal on the carb body. It's possible to get these slightly off-centre, and this will cause an air leak. Fit the spring in the seat as shown. Then the spacer. Then the spring retainer cap. Then the nut, and not forgetting the lock washer. Check that the spring has seated properly. Tighten using a 12mm spanner and bend up the tab washer. Check that the action is crisp. Fitting the throttle valve adjust screw. This is the type that was fitted on the earlier models. The later type used a spring. Don't forget the circlip. Now we're fitting the components in the float chamber. Fit a new O-ring on the needle jet. Check the holes have no blockages. Fit the gasket. This is a genuine Suzuki gasket. Some aftermarket gaskets may need trimming to fit. Fit the needle valve and filter if it's in good condition. Screw it in, not forgetting the washer. Tighten with a 10mm socket. Push in the needle jet followed by the float and float pin. The float pin is kept in place by the float chamber. Set the float height by using a vernier gauge set to 27.6mm. It's very important when you measure the height that the gasket is in place and the needle valve is sprung upwards. You may need to tilt the carburettor to get this to stay up. If you're fitting an aftermarket needle valve, set the float height to 26mm as the design is slightly different. Make adjustment by bending this tab with a flat screwdriver like this. The main jet specifications are size 110 for the two outside carbs and size 107.5 for the centre carb. The reason for this is that the centre carb runs warmer, increasing flow, and there's a 2 cc difference in the capacity of the centre cylinder. Now screw in the pilot jet, again firm but do not over-tighten. Standard size for this jet is 47.5, but you may find that 45 is fitted. This makes little difference and may just be due to varying emission laws or altitude. When fitting the drain plug, be extra careful that the washer is correctly seated on the lip. Finally, fit the 4 float bowl screws. Carb tops. These are the components required to fit the diaphragm assembly. Firstly, fit the circlip midway onto the needle, making sure it's clipped in firmly. This is how needle position has an effect on plug temperature. The middle one is the ideal colour for a 2-stroke engine. Lightly grease the outer edge of the carb, ready for the diaphragm. This will help to seal and keep it in place when fitting the top. The jet needle goes into the diaphragm assembly first, then the cap. It can now be fitted into the carb body, noting that it locates here. Push the spring in and locate it into the slot in the cap and fit the screws. All 3 diaphragms and tops are the same. To test the diaphragm, push the piston up, put your finger over the intake hole, and the piston should stay in position or drop very slowly. Don't forget to replace the caps on the left and right carburetors. These are used for setting the carb balance with a vacuum gauge. The centre one goes to the vacuum-operated petrol tap. When assembling the centre carb, you'll notice that there's one difference, this being the spring retainer bracket. On the right carb, you'll require these components. Notice here, the spring is slightly taller on the latch. This assembly is for adjusting the idle speed and fits to the right-hand carb body. You'll require 2 pieces of fuel hose, each cut to 28mm in length. This is for connecting the fuel passageways between the carb bodies. Push these firmly on. 6 screws hold the carb support bracket in place, but do not tighten these at this stage. Fit the top bracket screws, again without making them too tight. Use a straight edge to check that all of the carbs are aligned correctly before the final tighten. This helps to keep the carbs balanced at wider throttle openings. Choke bar. Here are the choke bar components. Push the bar along. Put Loctite on each of the screws. Note that these are specific to this job as they're pointed at the end for locking into the holes in the choke bar. Before fitting the choke lock assembly, make sure that the lever can move freely. Balancing. If you look at the top of the throttle valve, you can see 3 small holes. Use the one closest to the front of the carb body and align all 3 throttle valves to the same position, ideally with a magnifying glass. Use these screws to make any adjustment. Now, I believe this is how the carbs were balanced when the bikes were new, and it's proved extremely accurate. Fit the vent tube mounts and tubes. These are important to stop any debris entering the carburetors. Fit the main fuel supply hose, ensuring that you put the retaining clip on. Your carburetors are now complete and ready to be fitted. Cable route. Adjust the nuts where the cables meet the handlebar throttle so there are no extreme angles. Bring the cables over the right side of the frame. We recommend that you fit the cables to the carbs while they're off the bike, as it's near impossible to fit them when the carbs are in place. Here's the correct position for the carb intake rubbers. You can see that there's a slight ramp. Don't forget the clutch cable guide. This is showing how the throttle adjusts the oil pump. When the engine isn't running, it doesn't always return. This is nothing to worry about. Here are the 2 aligning marks showing that this is correctly set with a closed throttle. Here you can see the position for running in a rebuilt engine. This setting provides more oil. Replace the tank rubbers and replace the tank. Switch the fuel tap to prime to allow the carbs to fill with fuel. This should only take about 1 minute, and you must then return the tap to the on position. This will then only allow fuel to flow when the engine is running. We hope that this DVD has been of assistance to you. Don't forget you can contact us at the email address shown if you want any further assistance.